So as we've talked about before, the readings are assigned for the Sunday, but there's a lot else that is going on in regards to Sundays because there are things that go on in my life, there are things that go on in your life, there is the news of the world, there is the news of the nation, all kinds of things that intersect as we gather. Here we are on Mother's Day. Mother's Day, the week after a leak from the Supreme Court in regards to Roe v. Wade, which has stirred up our nation. There's a lot going on, and as a church that is supportive of access to health resources for all people, especially those who are vulnerable, this has been a lot. But I feel like every week we gather, it feels like a lot, right? These last couple of years, and life sometimes is a lot. When we gather and talk about all of the readings that we have relative to this life, sometimes it feels like they don't stick exactly. But I'm mindful today particularly of the first reading that comes from the book of Acts. We have a woman whose name is Tabitha, likely in Aramaic or something similar to that. Her Greek name is Dorcas, who has passed away. And we have, curiously, both of those names. Fascinating that it is recorded and remembered. And we have this lengthy discussion of the difference that Dorcas made in her community, all of the things that she had done for others. We think of all of the clothes that she had made, all of these things, the people who are just in outright grief at her death. They send for Peter, who is in a nearby village, and he comes, and we hear the story as we hear it here, Peter raising her from the dead. It is kind of a powerful story, particularly the extent to which we get the backstory of Dorcas is fascinating. Now, when we think, particularly on a day like this, of people who make a positive difference in the lives around them, a woman in this story, as we think about Mother's Day in particular. Now, Mother's Day can be a complicated thing. It lands on everyone in different ways. Sometimes it lands on people who are wishing to be mothers who have not been able to, people who had strained relationships with their mothers. There's a million different ways in which we respond to this holiday, but nonetheless, we are on it. And one of the things that we hear from the gospel text that I think speaks to this as well is this issue of the sheep hearing my voice, knowing that voice. Sometimes when we have lost a loved one, perhaps in our modern era, we still might have a phone message or a video that we see where we might hear their voice and we know it. We don't even have to see them, we can know it. Or I know, probably unique to my circumstance, but maybe not, that my mother can say my name in several different ways, and it doesn't need any other words with it, and I know exactly what she means. Is it Matt? Is it Matthew? If it's Matthew Allen, that is a bad sign as to where the phrase is going. And I know exactly where it's going, right? That we know who we belong to. Now, one of the things that I was thinking about in all of that aspect of the readings and the day's events is the fact that, like perhaps some of you, if not all of you, one of my routines when I get up is to see how Volodymyr Zelensky is doing and how are things in Ukraine and all of this horrific activity that was happening there. But also in our own society, as we think of judgments in courts on various issues, or who knows what the case might be, it is a reminder to us as human beings of our fondness at times for hammers in this world. We often are afraid or we are angry because of hurts we have experienced previously in our lives. And one of the responses to that sometimes is to lash out. And over time, in a society and in individual lives, we may take our toolbox and begin to get rid of the screwdrivers, get rid of the wrenches, and replace them just with beautiful, beautiful, beautiful hammers. And when the toolbox is full of only hammers, every problem becomes a nail, right? Every problem becomes a nail. I want to talk about other things that we carry that hold things. I know there's probably a number of Harry Potter fans here, and I don't normally go to Harry Potter for references as a general rule, but there is a magical spell in the Harry Potter universe that is the Expandable Charm, right? Some of you will know what I'm talking about. So it allows for things like taxis that on the outside are normal, but you can sit 15 people in the back seat, or a small tent that you might take for 2 people that you step inside of, and it's a 3,000 square foot house on the inside. Or, in the last couple of movies, the last book of the series, Hermione Granger, in their last adventures, has a purse that she brings with her. It's a small purse, about this size, but it's had an expandable charm put on it. And so throughout the movie, you'll routinely see her sinking her arm all the way up to her armpit into this bag and pulling out just unbelievably large things that have been stored in this. A scene where there's this thudding sound and she realizes that the books have fallen over inside this tiny little bag. But when I was thinking about this toolbox and this bag, one of the things that I looked at online is the top 10 items found in a mother's bag or purse. Now, this is not going to be true for everyone, but I thought it was interesting, some of the things in there, because of the character of these items. One was wipes. Gotta have wipes. Today, maybe 1B would be hand sanitizer, right? But wipes. The thing that's interesting to me about that is that wipes are used to clean up your own mess, perhaps, but they're also used to clean up the mess of others, right? The child that you are with, or perhaps you're having lunch with a friend and something happens and, oh, I have wipes, and you grab them and you might clean them up. When our kids were little, we would often have little plastic containers full of Cheerios. This was to keep them busy at various times. But we realized sometimes when we went out to dinner, the Cheerios would kind of a mess. So we would sometimes give to the server what we referred to as a Cheerio tip, because we realized that we had left a little more of a debris field behind than was reasonable for one table's worth of diners. So this idea of cleaning up after others, as opposed to standing back and saying, well, I got a hammer if you don't clean that up, right? That would be a different kind of vibe. Or we think of Band-Aids that you might find in a purse, right? So Band-Aids, you might scrape your arm, you might do something, somebody else might scrape their arm, their knee, who knows what the case might be. You make sure you have the right Band-Aids, right? So you want to be able to, help yourself out, but also help someone else out. Maybe one of your little someones, but maybe not. Maybe it's a friend, somebody you bump into on the sidewalk that you see just fell, and you have a Band-Aid and can assist them. It's oriented out, right? If somebody falls and scrapes their legs, you don't dash up to them and say, I've got a hammer, I'm here to help. That's not a thing, right? It would be bandages that you would use. Tissues do a lot of things. Help clean up stuff. There's any number of things. Sometimes you run into rough patches. Maybe lunch is a little late and somebody maybe doesn't handle it as well as other people at the table, and maybe there are tears. Maybe there's a runny nose. Not that we have those anymore, but just hypothetically saying, if there's a runny nose, that you can wipe their nose with it. But again, the orientation is out. You don't have the sense of, Johnny, I'm so sorry, your nose is running. Let me get my hammer. That's not a thing. You don't use a hammer for that purpose. You don't take a moment in someone's life or experience, wherever they might be, where they might be struggling, and say, how could I make this harder for them? This was hard for me. By God, it should be hard for you too. That's a part of who we are as human beings. I think when we have the first reading today, Dorcas is suggesting we don't need to make life harder for other people because life is hard. That's why the 10 items on that list are not all the items on the list, right? There's a lot of things. There's crayons, there's small toys, there's any number of things that suggest an orientation outwards to assist people in moving through this life in a way that is nurturing and supportive. Now, when we think about how that works, exemplified as we see in the first reading by Dorcas, I'm mindful of a time when I got lost at church. Now, it wasn't here. It wasn't like this week or anything. This was when I was a kid. So we attended the largest Missouri-centered Lutheran church east of the Mississippi. It was huge. The sanctuary could fit 3 of ours in it. And it was in the center of the property. So when you went into the narthex, there were two main exits to 2 different parking lots. And as a little guy who had gone to Sunday school, I went out the building confident that I knew where my parents would be, and I was on the wrong side of the building because they look the same, and it was huge. Now, when I was a kid, one of the things that I noticed and learned early on, as much as I love my dad and as much as my dad loves me, if I was in a moment of uncertainty and needed help, I would look for adults that looked like my mom. That's not going to be true necessarily for everyone, but I would suggest that that's probably not unique to my experience. People that have purses with tissues. People that aren't wandering around looking like, hey buddy, watch it, I got a hammer for that. I think when we look at the text that we have for today, I think there is a sense that we are being called to look out, that we are being called to see if there aren't ways that we can offer tissues and wipes and bandages and any other kind of thing that is supportive of those who are struggling around us, and not seeking ways to make life harder because our own lives maybe were hard in various patches. Is our response, it was hard for me, and it should be hard for you? Or should our response better be, it was hard for me, I hope I can make it easier and better for you? It may sound simple, but it's costly. It's a way in which we move through this life that is oriented towards others and away from ourselves in a way that seeks to lift up those who are hurting. And I think as we gather on this day with all these things intersecting, and we think about Dorcas and the example that she gives, that we're called to put the hammers away, find ways to lift up those around us. Amen.